We are in a series that is exploring the life of David, but not just to know more about David or to remember those stories for their own sake, but because David is described by God as a man after God's own heart. It gives us the ability to look at some of David's characteristics and some of the things that he does that reflect that heart of God. And so we can know some about the heart of God by looking at these stories. And that's what we are really after. We have explored some of the well-known stories of David and maybe some that you weren't as familiar with, and we'll continue to do that. But we've seen David go from his anointing by Samuel to be the next king after Saul, to rising to prominence as he faced down Goliath, to becoming the friend of Jonathan, the son of the king, to then going and running away from Saul, and as Saul pursued him and he hid in caves, and he saw in the caves God's presence was with him. And as he was tempted, as we saw last week, to take the shortcut to the throne, we saw David as a man of integrity who is waiting on God's timeline. And today we jump forward in the story just a little bit. We've been in 1 Samuel for the most part, and we are moving into 2 Samuel today. And as we pick up the story today, Saul and Jonathan have died, and David has now taken over as the king of Israel. He's made Jerusalem the new capital of the nation. And now, as we pick up the story today, David intends not just for Jerusalem to be the place that is kind of the seat of government and the capital that he lives and reigns from, but to be the very home of God's presence. And so he seeks to move the Ark of the Covenant to the city of Jerusalem. The Ark is, of course, more than a decorative box, more than a symbol for the nation. It is intended to be the hotspot of God's presence. It is the place where God dwells, and so ultimately when they would place it in the tabernacle, and when they would build the temple and put it there in the Holy of Holies, the Ark of the Covenant was the place where God's presence would dwell. And so it was a big deal to move this ark to the city of Jerusalem. And they made a first attempt to move it, and they didn't quite follow the instructions. They didn't quite do it the way that they were supposed to. They treated it improperly and treated it a little too casually. And there was a guy named Uzzah who died in the process. And when this happened, when Uzzah dies, it kind of rattles David a little bit. And I am sure he's not alone in that, being afraid, like, maybe we shouldn't bring this into Jerusalem. Or at least not yet. It seems far too dangerous. And so what he does is, for a time, he leaves the ark with a guy named Obed-Edom, who happens to live nearby. And, I wonder what Obed-Edom was thinking when he was given this to watch over for a little while. Is this good luck? Is this bad luck? It's just killed a guy, so now we've got to watch it. And David goes on to Jerusalem, but then he gets word 3 months later that Obed-Edom is experiencing enormous blessing as a result of the ark being in his house. And David's mindset shifts from dealing with the ark from a threat management perspective to recognizing that it is the presence of God that is not just dangerous, but it also, when treated properly, brings about life and joy and blessing. And so he wants to bring the ark again to Jerusalem, to bring that flow of blessing from the presence of God into the city. If you've watched much baseball this season, you may have seen a trend that is going around at the ballparks that is called tarps off. And if you don't know what that is, it is when a group of guys kind of take over a section of the stadium, and at a point in the game, they all take their shirts off and wave them around above their head. You've probably seen something like that. I hear that there's different stories about how it got started. Some say that it actually started at an OSU football game because somebody bet somebody to do the thing, and then it kind of spread from there. But somehow it made its way into Major League Baseball and has become kind of a phenomenon. And you can go, I thought about putting up a picture of it, but I figured that was a little too much skin for Sunday morning service. So. Anyways, but it's called Tarps Off. When it happened with the St. Louis Cardinals, when it kind of got started there with a group of college students from SFA, it impressed the manager of the Cardinals so much that he wanted them to come back the next day and bought a bunch of them tickets. Because it raised the excitement in the environment, it got people just really amped up as they did this, and maybe it seems like a silly thing, and it really is. But that joy and that excitement was contagious around the ballpark, and they wanted to capture that and kind of recreate that. And as we think about the joy and that excitement, there is no greater joy available to us than the presence of our Creator coming among us. If we will just recognize it, if we will just receive it for what it is, for who He is. And so this morning, as the ark makes its way to Jerusalem, David has kind of his own tarps off moment, so to speak. And so as they bring the ark to Jerusalem, this is the story. 2 Samuel chapter 6, verse 12. It was told to King David, the Lord has blessed the household of Obed-Edom and all that belongs to him because of the ark of God. So David went and he brought up the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom into the city of David with rejoicing. We're going to continue. I'm going to pause there for just a second. With rejoicing. This time when they bring the ark, they are much more careful than they were the previous time. They move it kind of appropriately, and they do the sacrifices, and they are respectful of it. But as they bring it in, David rejoices. The word is simha, which means an expression of joy. It means jubilation, which is a fun word. It is jubilant. He is jubilant as they enter into the city. It is a word that is intended to express overwhelming joy, not just I kind of like this, right? This is an overwhelming joy that he has. And so our first point this morning is when we know the blessing of God's presence, it can unleash within us a joy like nothing else. That's the way it should be. And we are the people that know God's presence, that in fact, God's presence comes and inhabits us in a way. We are God's temple now. We should be the most joyful people on earth. When we know the blessing of God's presence, it can unleash a joy like nothing else. And consider this morning, what brings you joy? What makes you feel, what do you encounter that makes you feel like shouting in celebration? The kind of thing where you don't care who hears or sees, you just got to let it out. Is there anything in life that brings you that kind of joy? And can we experience that sort of overwhelming jubilation from knowing the goodness and the presence of our God? The passage goes on in verse 14, and it says, after he rejoiced, then it says, and David danced before the Lord with all of his might. Don't you wish that they had video back then? And David was wearing a linen ephod. So David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouting and with the sound of the horn. This is a parade. Okay? This is a celebration as David, the king of Israel, is dancing down the road in celebration, along with the horns that are blasting, and he's celebrating the arrival of the presence of God in the Ark of the Covenant to the city of Jerusalem. The word dance is karar, and it literally means to whirl and spin around. And it involves this spinning, whirling, leaping kind of thing, which is, I don't know how you envision this in your mind, seeing David do this, but it kind of makes me laugh. Like it is an entertaining thing, and I think that's the point. It is a joyful celebration. This was no solemn procession that was marching down the street. And to be clear, there's time for that too. It's just that that's not the only mode that we come before God with. This was a celebration. Remember that, as I said earlier, when we look at these stories, we're not just learning about David. We're trying to catch a glimpse of the heart of God. And we see in this celebratory attitude, we see our God as the fountain of life and blessing and all the good things that are available to us in life. Our God is the source. And he delights to bless his children. He delights in caring for us. He delights in us finding the joy of being present with him. And I think he delights in this moment with David's authenticity. So there's just no pretense. He just comes before God and he sheds those royal robes. And this moment isn't about celebrating him as king. This is about God's child celebrating the presence of his Father. It's about him being king. And I really believe that God invites his children to enjoy him. I don't know that everybody has that view of their God, that see him as the God that wants them to enjoy their life in him. Sometimes we can have this sense of God that we just come before him with this kind of like solemn attitude. And again, there are times for that. But he also invites us to come and celebrate before him, to enjoy his presence, to be joyful with one another. Psalm 16:11, David wrote, "You make known to me the path of life, and in your presence there is fullness of joy. And at your right hand are pleasures forevermore." Which, by the way, that word there, fullness of joy, is the very same word that was used in the passage we read, simha, for David's rejoicing. It's the fullness of the joy. That is where it is found, in the presence of God. You can imagine a loving parent coming home to their family after being at work all day or on a trip, and their young children, especially the young children, see them come in and squeal with delight and run into their parents' arms, excited to see them. That's the spirit. That's the attitude that we see here at play. This is what we're called to. God is inviting us to enjoy him. David is reacting to his father coming home in a sense. The unfortunate reality is, as we seek to be joyful people, your joy is a target. Your joy is a target for the enemy. Because your joy is a threat to the forces of evil, and so the enemy will seek to rob you of that joy if he can find a way to do it. He wants to pull the song from your voice. And so, we want to guard against that. We do not want the enemy to steal our joy or to distract us away from the joy of being a child of God. We want to guard against that. And so we want to identify and guard against those thieves of joy. And we're going to look a little bit further into this story of David to see what some of those thieves of joy might be. Verse 16. As the ark of the Lord came into the city of David, Michal, the daughter of Saul, David's wife, looked out of the window and saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord. And she despised him in her heart. She was embarrassed. She saw the king, her husband, David, acting, in her mind, acting a fool for everybody to see. And she looked at him with contempt. Biblical joy is beautiful. Biblical joy is beautiful, but to those who are on the outside of it looking in, it can feel to them disruptive, it can feel to them embarrassing. And the truth is that some people are just bitter and bothered by others' happiness. And so Michal looks on at this celebration with a distant and cold judgment. And she lacks the ability to see or experience the excitement of the moment. And as a side note, I am reminded as I say that of the parable that Jesus tells of the prodigal son. When the son comes home and there is celebration and the older brother looks on with contempt. The bitterness in people's hearts remains. It is persistent. It is hard to get rid of, and it can steal joy. She's going to represent for us, Michal is going to represent for us the thief of joy this morning. And we're going to seek to guard ourselves against it because we should guard ourselves from the thieves of this God-given joy. Remember, Jesus said in John chapter 10, verse 10, that the thief comes to steal and kill and destroy, but I have come that they may have life and have it abundantly. In Proverbs 4:23 tells us, keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flow the springs of life. We need to guard our hearts. We need to guard away from the thief that wants to come and steal away what God has given us. And so what do we need to watch out for? What do we see in Michal that we need to watch out for and guard against in this respect? We're going to look at two things this morning, just two things. And there are more than this, but these are two things that we see in this story. First is this: an over-concern for what other people think. I'm going to admit to you up front, I struggle with that. An over-concern with what other people think can get in our heads and make us worry about appearances so much that we don't even see the joyful thing that's right in front of us. You notice when we read the passage, Michal is referred to as the daughter of Saul. I had to tell you that she is David's wife. It doesn't say that in that part of the text. We know it from other scriptures. But it connects her to Saul rather than to David in that moment, because what she is doing is reflective of her father much more than it is of her husband. She thinks like Saul in a way. Saul was also concerned with appearances. There came a time, you can read it in 1 Samuel 15, there came a time when Saul found out from Samuel that the kingdom was being stripped from him, that he was going to lose the throne. He found out he was rejected by God, and what he followed up on that with, he told Samuel, he begged Samuel to just still at least show him honor in front of the other people. He was, in that moment, seemingly more concerned about the applause of men than the approval of God. And that was characteristic of many of the ways that Saul acted in his reign. It's one of the things that is different about David, but Michal sort of carries on that tradition. What will people think? What will people say? David, have you thought about how this reflects on me? And look at the greeting when David gets home. Michal's been watching him from the window as he dances around, and he gets back home, and I imagine as he enters in, maybe he's excited to share with her the news of the arrival of the ark and invite her to join in on the celebration. Verse 20, as David returned to bless his household, Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet David, and she said, "Oh, how the king of Israel honored himself today, uncovering himself today before the eyes of his servants, female servants, as one of the vulgar fellows shamelessly uncovers himself." You hear this bitterness? What she says is dripping with biting sarcasm, dripping with contempt, and she starts to say things that are exaggerations. That's what her bitterness is doing. Sometimes it's characterized what David was doing as dancing around naked. And I think that's based on what she says here. That's not the story if you read it. He's not dancing around naked. He has shed his royal robes. And he is wearing a linen ephod. He's wearing the kind of just basic, common, nothing special clothing. He's wearing the same thing that servants might wear as he does this. And so what she's mad about is not kind of like an indecency. She's mad about him looking like a commoner. He stripped away the status symbols of his kingship so that he could worship the true king and draw attention to him. But Michal is furious because she so values that status. We read the proverb a couple of weeks ago when we looked at the story of David and Goliath, that the fear of man lays a snare. Worrying about other people's thoughts and what they might do is a trap. Paul was sometimes accused of playing to the crowd to get their approval, and he strongly objected to that. And he says, Paul says in Galatians chapter 1, verse 10, he says, "Am I now seeking the approval of man or of God? Or am I trying to please man? If I were still trying to please man, I would not be a servant of Christ." You see what he does there? He pits this pursuit of trying to appease other people and worrying about what they think and what they're going to do. Worrying about that so much is at odds, Paul says, with being a servant of Christ. Now, to be sure, I notice I phrase it an over-concern with what others think. To be sure, there is a certain amount of concern that is appropriate for being considerate of other people and thinking about what they might think so that I can connect with them more effectively and make relationships. Some of that's required. But if we are driven by carefully curating others' opinions of us, then we're going to shackle ourselves and our ability to be joyful. And so an over-concern for what others think is a potential thief of our joy. And I would just invite you to consider that. Secondly, we see in Michal is kind of related to that. We see in her attitude a kind of cynicism. And cynicism, there's a cynicism that can blind us to the beauty of God. I've heard it said as a reminder that cynicism is not one of the fruits of the Spirit. The cynic, if you're wondering what we mean when we say that, picture this. The cynic is somebody who sees the joy of somebody else and squints at it with skepticism, assuming the worst in them instead of looking for the good. Cynicism sometimes masquerades as a type of wisdom that's trying to be discerning. And of course, discernment is good, and we want to do that. But a cynical discernment takes joy in poking holes in every idea that it is presented, and always looking for somebody's hidden agendas, and it just becomes a wet blanket on the expression of joy. Michal had looked down, literally, looking down on David from her window. And when she did, she despised him. She held him in contempt because she had a cynical view. She was blinded. She was blinded to the joy of the celebration that could be hers too. And so David says to her, when she says all of this, her dripping sarcasm about what he's been doing and what are other people going to think, this is what he has to say back to her. David said to Michal, "It wasn't for other people. It was before the Lord who chose me above your father and above all his house to appoint me as prince over Israel, the people of the Lord. And listen, Michal, I will celebrate before the Lord. I will make myself yet more contemptible than this. I will be abased in your eyes. But by the female servants of whom you've spoken, by them I shall be held in honor." He says, you think this is bad? Buckle up, sister. Because I'm going to get even more contemptible if this is the way you're going to look at it. He says, but the people even at the lowest end of the spectrum of our society, they're going to see the honor here. They're not going to be all in their heads about what everybody thinks. They're going to recognize what's going on, and they will join in the celebration. They will shed this cynicism that is pervading your perspective, and they will worship God. He tries to help her to see. He tries to point her eyes and her heart in the right direction. He wants her to know what there is to celebrate, that this God of the universe has chosen them and has lifted him up into this position that he knows he doesn't deserve, but he's been placed there, and it's a position of honor, and it's something worth praising God over. And God has come home to Jerusalem, and he's going to bless our city, and our city is going to be a light to the nations, and everything is going to change because of this. So he says, I will celebrate. And your opinion's not going to hold me back. And those who get it will join me. That's the joy that we see flowing from David. You can imagine going to a legendary concert of your favorite band, and you can imagine there being in the front row the real fans who have saved up for these tickets, and they're excited to be there, and they're singing at the top of their lungs with every song, high-fiving strangers next to them, maybe being brought to tears and holding up their phones with a little light to wave it around with the music. In contrast, there's a music critic sitting up in a box, watching, squinting, listening, analyzing the acoustics, noting the flaws that are in the solo, drafting his sarcastic review of the performance. Who really experienced the music? The critic, maybe he stays dignified where he is, but goes home empty. The real fan in the scenario may look foolish to people around them, but they go home with hearts full. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 15. See to it that no one fails to obtain the grace of God, and that no root of bitterness springs up and causes trouble. For by it many have become defiled. Sadly, a root of bitterness springing up and causing trouble has been the story of many a congregation. Of people who bring that kind of cynicism as they look at their brothers and sisters in Christ, who can't bring themselves to experience joy because they're so concerned with appearance. I mentioned that joy can be contagious. It spreads and people join in and celebrate, but it's true also, maybe even more true, of bitterness. When bitterness is left unchecked, it's like a poison that drains the life out of a church. You know, in our heritage in Churches of Christ, we tend to be a pretty, and I relate to this, a pretty rational and reserved community of people. That's an overgeneralization, not true of everybody, but generally speaking, that tends to be the way that we are. And when I talk about celebrating and experience joy, I'm not really suggesting that we start running up and down the aisles and things like that. I'm talking about the posture of our hearts. I'm talking about fully engaging our inner selves and allowing the glory of God to be impressed upon us when we are in His presence so that we drop our own egos. It is such a good and joyful thing to be in the presence of God, and we want to seize on to that. The story that we've been reading this morning is also told in 1 Chronicles. And it gives us some more information about what happens what happens after the ark comes into Jerusalem. And it tells us here in 1 Chronicles 16, it says that they brought in the ark of God and set it inside the tent, that's the tabernacle, that David had pitched for it. And they offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before God. And when David had finished offering the burnt offerings and the peace offerings, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord and distributed to all Israel, both men and women, to each a loaf of bread, a portion of meat, and a cake of raisins. Then he apportioned some of the Levites as ministers before the ark of the Lord to invoke, to thank, and to praise the Lord, the God of Israel. And so David takes this moment of celebration and he establishes it as something that's going to spread throughout the nation. And he gives people reason to be excited. He gives people reason to find joy. And he starts by feeding them. And he sends out bread and meat, which I can get on board with. I don't know about the cake of raisins, but it must have been delightful for them. They send out fruitcakes. But he sends all these things out. And it becomes a national event to establish this kind of ongoing rhythm of life so that they remember this joyful thing that has happened and they can be sustained by the ongoing joy of God's presence among them. And as it goes on from here, David has a whole song that he writes about all of this, which Jerry read a part of for us at the beginning of the sermon. But it concludes with this. It says, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, from everlasting to everlasting." Like for all time. This isn't just a flash in the pan moment. We want this joy to be going on and on and on. And all the people said, "Amen." And they praised the Lord. And you see how David intended for this joy, not Michal's bitterness, to be the thing that spreads throughout the people of God. In choosing a joy that doesn't hold back can kind of unlock a life of spiritual legacy. And what I mean is David's joy becomes something that spreads around, and that joy from the Lord sustains the people time on and on through time. And David assigned, it said, this kind of dedicated team of the Levites, and they're going to do three things, he says. They're going to invoke, that is, they're going to help the people to remember what's happened. They're going to thank. They're going to acknowledge God's hand and what He has done and what He continues to do, that it is from Him. And they're going to praise. They're going to pour out that joy before Him and joyfully lift Him up. And if this is the way that God's people in the place that He has planted them at that time are going to be, then the nations around them have the opportunity to look from their darkness into this light and see what this God is like. That is the same thing that we are called to. That's the same story that we are invited to participate in. This very exciting event of David could have been a powerful bolt of lightning, but instead David harnessed that. And instead of a bolt of lightning, it becomes a spiritual power grid. the people could have for ongoing joy in the Lord. And this is what we have when we share in the joy together. Rather than just a joyful rejoicing by myself, we share in the joy together, and it creates this ongoing support system of joy. We'll begin to wrap up here. Psalm 145, David writes, "I will extol you, my God and King, and bless your name forever and ever. Great is the Lord, and greatly to be praised, and his greatness is unsearchable. One generation shall commend your works to another, and shall declare your mighty acts." May that continue to be true of us today as well. As we praise him, as we pass that on from one generation to the next. And so today, this morning, is an invitation to joy. An invitation to experience enjoying being in the presence of our God, to be in the joy of our King, to be joyful before the God who loves you, who sustains you and the rest of his creation. He's present with us. In this very moment, he is present with us. May we choose to embrace and celebrate the joy of that reality. May we guard against the kinds of things that steal joy, like self-consciousness and cynicism. And may God continue to build a legacy of his joy in our fellowship for all the coming generations. This morning, we want you to know that we are here for you. And the next song is an invitation song. And if you need anything, I'll be at the back of the room with the elders. If you want to be baptized today, that would be a joyful celebration in and of itself. If you want to come and follow Jesus and be baptized into him. If you need prayers or somebody to talk to, we'd love to be there for you in that as well. Let's conclude with this final verse from Colossians 3:16, and then we'll sing. "Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, teaching and admonishing one another in all wisdom, singing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs with thankfulness in your hearts to God." If we can be there for you this morning, would you please reach out as we stand and sing?